All right, welcome everybody. We are going to give folks a few minutes to join. Looks like we've got a number of folks in the waiting room coming in. Hope everyone's having a great day today. I am excited to dive into this topic. We're going to continue our series on building a future-proof transformation office. I'll introduce the topic in a second, but we'll let people get in the room first. And while we're waiting, as is my habit, I'd love to know where you're from, but I'm going to ask you a second question today also. We're doing a little informal poll. So if you would in the chat, type in where you're calling in from today, but also share with us what was your first language? I'm curious about the diversity of languages in this audience today. So both where are you from and your first language. All right. English speakers, I expected that would be number one today for sure. All right. Texas English and Canadian English being two flavors of English. That is not wrong. Minnesota English as well, yes. Spanish, English, Cana French Canadian. So yeah, there's some variations there. I'm assuming French. Another Spanish speaker. I'm asking this question because we've been doing some research into the Fortune 500. We communicate in English predominantly. Something like 90% of communications go out in English, but almost 50% of employees in the Fortune 500 do not have English as their first language. So it creates a real barrier to change adoption. So it's something I've been curious about, and I'm liking some of the direction I'm getting here. I've got some English, some Slavic, some Chinese as well. All right. Well, let's dive in. Looks like we've got a pretty good quorum. We're going to start the process today. First introductions. I think almost everybody on this session has been attending prior sessions, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But I am Eric Wood, the Chief Strategy Officer of Tigerhall, and authored the Strategy Activation Playbook, which a lot of this content is based on. This is also the direction of my next book, actually, which will be on standing up a transformation office for the modern age. So really appreciate the conversation I've been having with a lot of you over the last couple of weeks. It's great to start to build some new material here and co-create it together with you. We are going to today go to the midpoint of our series and talk about how to set up a transformation office. So today's session is going to be very much a kind of a methodical approach to how we do this. Before we do that, I just want to review for those of you that weren't here last week, the last episode. So last week we talked about various transformation models on a spectrum from centralized to distributed with some version of hybrid in the middle. The point of view that I shared was that the correct model depends on your current structure, culture, and your operating environment. So every one of your models is going to have to be different based on your context. But we all share one common reality, which is that the pace of the future is only accelerating. So the change initiatives are only accelerating. And ultimately, if we take that context together with our model, we need to start future-proofing our model for where we're headed, not where we're at today. So that'll really lean into our conversation today about how to do that. My recommendation last week was this. I believe that a well-designed hybrid style of transformation office approach is the most durable advantage for the future. Given that environment of perpetual transformation, only a model that's going to support both tops-down direction and bottoms-up adaptability will actually be able to scale sustainably. And it's going to require a common core of both your change capacity as well as a culture of agility. So we got to work on both parts, not only the transformation office as a capability, but also the culture that supports it. So I'm hopeful that we will be sort of moving forward from this conversation into a more of a how-to approach today. We want to discuss what I've laid out as sort of a step-by-step roadmap for how we can actually establish a transformation office. But importantly, for those of you that are in an office today, in some form of an office or not in an office, you can also use these step-by-step methodologies as ways to sort of test where you're at and where you need to go. So I think there's going to be something for everybody today. We're going to understand the strategic rationale for why we need to build the TO and the risk of operating without one. We're going to spend some time looking at 11 critical steps. I'll tell you why I picked 11 later on. And then we're going to actually identify some of the key success metrics that you can use to actually measure the efficacy of your transformation capability. So to ground us, I want to get a sense of where everyone's at in terms of your maturity model around transformation. So Julie's going to launch a poll, and I'm going to just check on this question. How would you describe the current maturity of your organization's transformation capability? Let's give folks a minute to answer this, and we'll get a sense of where we're at. We're still running at about half of the folks in the audience don't have a formal TO at this point, but we'll wait and see what comes in with the last, looks like we got another 20% reporting, and then we'll close it.
All right, I think we're good. Here, let me launch it up.
Let's publish. All right, interesting. In the chat, I'm curious if anyone's surprised by this result. We've got about 36% reporting that we don't have one at all. There's transformation efforts are mostly ad hoc. We've got about 30% saying we're in early stages. There's a central team, but it's still forming in the structure and scope. So that's good. So for this, roughly 70% of the audience, hopefully today will be a good meaty roadmap that you can utilize as you're making these efforts. For the rest of us, 16%, we have an established transformation office, or we have a hybrid transformation office, or in 4% of the cases, we're actually claiming the victory of it being a strategic driver. So that's where we want to get everyone to, is that last category. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. No surprises in the chat. So this is not a surprise to many folks. I'm always actually a little surprised that we don't see more organizations with at least a central capability. We tend to have very siloed organizations with change capabilities in one place, communication someplace else, perhaps learning and development in another place, and sort of forming that connective tissue is a key theme that we're going to talk about. So let's dive in. So why do we need a transformation office? So just kind of as a bit of review, in an era defined by rapid disruption, the ability to transform continuously and at scale is a core competitive advantage. This is one of my most important points that I've been trying to make in my recent publications. I do believe that in the future, we're siloed into these sort of organizations that have the change capabilities distributed across the organization, but not collectively organized. So when you've got those siloed systems of different capabilities spread around in different places without the connective tissue, ultimately you end up with fragmented initiatives, possibly duplicative initiatives, and you don't have sort of visibility across the enterprise priorities. So there's a lot of waste and churn in the organization. And without that centralized TO to sort of coordinate it, this is actually going to slow us down, right? So we have an inability to really deliver sustained impact at scale. Importantly, a TO can become that strategic nerve center in the enterprise and can enable that visibility, can enable that connective tissue. And ultimately, in this world of fast change, it's actually going to be the competitive advantage because it's going to help us keep up with that pace of change. We're not doing it today if we don't have that coordinated function. What happens in the world of without a transformation office? Well, there's some pains that we can outline here that are sort of symptoms of the problem. So, for those of you that are going, oh yeah, I feel that, great. Then this is a good founding case for why we need to shift. We end up seeing fragmented change in these organizations that don't have that central function. So business units are pursuing different conflicting priorities. Sometimes they're duplicating efforts and creating confusion in the organization. We see poor strategic alignment. So initiatives fail to align with enterprise strategy, and this wastes resources and time in our organization. We have a lack of accountability. So no single owner for transformation leads to missed deadlines and diluted impact across the enterprise. And of course, the biggest problem I think in the future is that we have slow response to change. So if we have inflexible governance and lack of data will impede those fast pivots in strategy that we need to have to be able to react to a faster changing world. Bottom line, this is going to lead to limited ROI. So the absence of clear metrics and coordination reduces the likelihood of realizing those transformation benefits that we're seeking. At the end of the day, the problem this is going to create for us, if we look like this, is that we are ultimately going to be, sorry, let me change my slides. We're going to be industry laggards, right? So as the world increases its pace, Those of us that are looking at this and going, yeah, that sounds like us, are going to continue to fall behind. So this sets up the argument that you can make in your organization to say, we need to invest in a transformation capability so we can actually solve these pain points. In the future state that we all want to get to, with a central transformation office, we now have a lot of benefits. We can build that durable competitive advantage. We go from those pains to having a more sort of a process of scalable enablement. We can use AI and automation to amplify reach, our precision, our efficiency, and really sort of be a force multiplier using technology in our organization. We can have more prioritized strategic alignment. So every initiative should tie directly to enterprise goals. And we can ensure that the work that we're doing is aligned with the vision for the company and where we want to be next. We can start to build that global local balance. We want to have that tailored execution that respects both the local needs, but also honors the priorities of the enterprise. And then my favorite of these is developing activation velocity. This is a term that I've been using a lot lately to really describe that idea that we can get faster delivery through shared tools, clear roles, and real-time data, and speed up the velocity at which we're activating people inside the organization. So this is going to be a core capability for the future. Ultimately, we want to have a culture of resilience. So we need to have a shared language and approach to change to enable that broad participation, to create those movements, to get people moving forward together more quickly towards the visions that we're trying to achieve. And then ultimately, this will also lead to predictable ROI realization. So the more we can measure and manage and get the data and the insights to know where the organization is and where we're going, the more we can predict how quickly we're moving up the activation curve towards those critical KPIs that we talked about last week. So my point of view for today is this. Without a dedicated transformation office, organizations will face accelerating complexity with decreasing resilience, and this is going to lead to competitive failure. This is going to start to bring us back to that spread where people are pulling ahead and we're falling behind. I believe that a hybrid transformation office and a change resilient culture will mitigate these risks while delivering that accelerated agility at scale. And to create that durable competitive advantage, we need to develop the executive mandate in the business case to future-proof our transformation capabilities. So a lot of what we're going to talk about next is going to be to give you a roadmap to start to be able to do that. Just checking the chat. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Julie, for responding to those. We will share the webinar as well as the slides. So for those of you that are interested in getting some of this data, we'll be pushing it out. So let me start our journey today. We are going to take an 11-step approach to building our transformation office. Given that 60 to 70% of folks don't have it, this is a great roadmap that you could start to use to inspire your own journey in your organization. And for the other 30% that do have some form of this, what I'd encourage you to do as we go through these steps is start to sort of measure yourself against it. Look at, what are we doing today? Are we doing these things? Have we ticked these boxes? And you can start to use that to form a gap analysis for yourself to say, how might we evolve and how might we continue to evolve our organization? So hopefully there's something in here for everybody today. So let's start with step one. Step one is that we need to establish the business case and the executive mandate. So if you don't have a transformation office today, what we want to do is start to build the business case for how we go from that pain state to that gain state that we just talked about. We've got to secure that executive alignment and formalize the need for a transformation office. The actions that you can take here to get that done, we want to quantify the cost of fragmented transformation efforts. So look in your organization today. Where are we seeing the waste? Where are we seeing the costs? We want to highlight the lost value as a result, the missed targets, and the risk exposure we're getting from that. So the best way to start your business case is to build the case for the pains that we're currently experiencing and cost that out. What is it costing us to not have this today? We then want to secure a clear C-suite mandate, ideally from the CEO or the CFO. The transformation office has to be having a table at the C-suite level. And we really need an executive sponsor who is either the leader of the organization or the leader of the finance function to make sure that we can get the resources that we need, the strategic alignment that we need, and ultimately the backing that we need to be successful. And then we want to make sure that we're defining the transformation office in your vision as you're building your business case as a strategic enabler, not a support function. So we need to move our positioning from oh, they'll take care of that, to we can't actually embark on this journey without them. So we got to get to that strategic level. We don't get to leave this first step until we've actually checked these boxes. So our requirements are these. We need to make sure we've got an executive sponsor, number one. If you don't, you got to keep building the business case till you do. You've got to have that business case with ROI analysis. We need to start speaking CFO from the start and start to enumerate the cost and the benefits of having and not having a transformation office. And you're not ready to go into step two until you've got initial budget. So make sure that you've got your budget allocation to embark. Next step, now we're going to define the transformation office's mission, scope, and success metrics. Our goal here is to make sure we've got a clear purpose and clear focus areas that we can communicate across the organization. We want to articulate the mission, the alignment, acceleration, and accountability goals. So in our mission, we talked last week about what those things are, and I believe that you can start with these three A's: alignment, acceleration, and accountability. We can build from that framework the definition of our scope. So we're going to be defining our scope as initiatives, strategy deployment, and change enablement at a minimum. So those three things are going to be things that you want to be focusing on. We also want to set our success metrics. So you want to be identifying what are those KCIs and those KPIs that we're going to use to measure our success so that we can constantly be reporting out on our progress. You're ready to cross the threshold to the next step here if you have a strategic charter document that documents all of this. You've got alignment with your C-suite around the KPIs that you're going to use to measure. And you've got enterprise-wide visibility mandate. You've got to be able to have the mandate to say, I'm doing this enterprise-wide, and this is being stood up as a strategic priority. Then we move to step three. We want to design the hybrid governance model. So our goal here is to balance central direction with local flexibility. Back to last week's conversation about models, in a fast-changing world, we're going to need to be able to balance some centralized control to make sure we're aligned with priorities and we have the backing and the mandate to make the changes that we need with localization. So that hybrid model in some form on the spectrum is probably the best starting point. The actions here, we're going to define the roles at both the center and the periphery. So let's get down to what is the accountability both at the central level and at the local level. We want to establish the decision rights. So who's going to set the priorities, who's going to allocate resources, who owns the outcomes. And we want to build some mutual accountability structures formally. So for example, we might have a central enterprise strategy, but it might be localized into different geographic regions. If that's the case, we need to understand who are the players that make those decisions and how do they link up. We can cross this threshold when we have these three things. We've got a governance framework and a racing model. We've got operating rhythm and escalation pathways. So if things go sideways, how do we resolve that? And we've got a local engagement strategy. We're starting to think about how do we actually get out on the periphery and how do we actually engage with those folks that are accountable in the periphery and make the decision processes and co-create the outcomes. All right, so now we're going to move one more step before we start climbing the hill. So step four, we got to stand up that core transformation office team. We want to build a foundational capability in the central transformation office. And this is going to be a cross-functional capability, importantly. We want to hire and assign core team members that include transformation leads, PMO experts, change professionals, communications experts, folks that are equipped with skills to build capabilities, learning, and development in the organization. We need a cross-functional team to bring those silos together into one coordinated group. Secondly, we've got to blend skills across strategy, change management, communications, and data. So we need to bring that group together. We need to cross-train and we need to equip the entire team collectively. And then ultimately, we want to structure for some agility with cross-functional pods or squads. So these need to work as teams. I've always said that the smartest person in the room is the room. If we've got those folks with those capabilities and those skills together in a group, they can actually take on almost any challenge and figure out what the right way to move forward will be. But it's important that they're working together and they're working closely. Our requirements here, number one, you've got to develop your organizational design and the job descriptions for the roles you need on your TO team. You need to build a change capability matrix. So look at the capabilities that you've got, understand what they are, what you need, and in what balance, and then make sure you're actually filling out an org chart to fit that. And then, of course, you got to start doing the fun stuff of hiring and onboarding. So build the plans for how you're going to do that. Make sure you've got a very clear onboarding plan that includes building those cross-functional skills, having people understand their roles in the matrix, and understanding together how they're going to work as a team. Once you've got that, you're going to start the hiring process. So your hiring process is going to either be recruiting people from your organization, bringing in people from outside. I always recommend a combination of both, right? Hiring from inside is good, but if you bring in some outside folks, you're going to get some new ideas. So mix it up a bit. Now we're going to start climbing the hill. So with that, we're at step 5. We want to develop the enterprise change model and toolkits. So I believe it's really important that we have a lingua franca. We have a common language on our team. We've got to create a consistent, repeatable framework for driving change. And there's a bunch of them out there. I'm fairly agnostic to which one is going to be right for your organization. That's a choice that you need to make, but have one. So the actions here: develop a common methodology that's adaptable across the business units, create standardized playbooks, toolkits, training. So make sure you're equipping your change leaders in all their functions with a common set of tools so that we can get there faster because we're all accustomed to using the same kit. We want to make sure we're aligning our framework across the organization. So if you're ProSci in your transformation office, make sure you're ProSci across the organization. If you're using Agile, then Agile's the lingua franca. If you're using my strategy activation toolkit from the strategy activation playbook, great. I would love to come help you with that. In any case, pick a lane and commit to it. And that's what you're going to be building your training and your toolkits from, so that you do have that common language. You're ready to cross to the next step here. If you've got your change model documented, you've got digital enablement, meaning that you've got some kind of a platform, a technology solution, something that's going to actually allow you to sort of house and distribute and deploy that toolkit. And you've got either internal or external training and certification program. So either you've adopted one of these methodologies and you're partnering with one of those organizations, sponsor organizations, to train your folks up in that toolkit, or you're building it at home and you're making your own. I've seen both work effectively. So with that, we keep climbing up the hill. Step 6, you want to be able to create a force multiplier in your organization by deploying enabling technologies. So use technology to scale, personalize, and monitor your transformation. We can do so much more today than we could do even 5 years ago with software platforms, with AI, with the various technologies that can stitch those things together. So start to look at how you can deploy AI-powered tools for content creation, tailoring your messages, analyzing sentiment, and understanding where people are in the organization. Start to integrate project portfolio management systems so that you can actually real-time track, these are the enterprise initiatives that we're driving and where they're at. You need to look at that portfolio management system to be able to look at that all in one place. And use data visualization tools to create executive dashboards. You want to be able to report out on both the KPIs and the KCIs, key change indicators, to be able to know where each of your initiatives are and be able to predict where you're moving towards those key KPIs. The requirements here, you've got to do the tech stack and vendor selection. So things like our service, Tigerhall, things like Wave from McKinsey. There's other products that are out there in some combination that might be the right ones for you. You want to make sure you've got an integration plan with enterprise systems. So how do you tie those things in and bolt them in so that they're talking to one another? You're going to need to be able to have a high degree of integration with your existing systems, because you're going to want to track indicators of behavior change. You want to look and see if the sales team is doing the steps that you're advising in your CRM system the way that you've been training them to do it. You can look for those signals, and those signals are data. So you want to integrate with systems to find those signals. And then you need to make sure you've got good data governance and privacy protocols. Obviously, we're going to be asking for a lot of data from the company to be able to actually track our initiatives. We want to make sure we've got the right protocols in place to make that happen successfully. Step 7, we're going to now align transformation initiatives with strategic priorities. So at this point, we've got the infrastructure, we've got some scaffolding. Really critical now that we go back to that C-suite and we ensure that all of our initiatives are aligned with the enterprise objectives. The actions we're going to take here, we're going to implement a centralized intake and prioritization process. So you've got to build a triage process to say, what are the initiatives? What are the things that we need to actually enact in the organization? What are we standing up to address those? So build your intake system and your triage system to be able to make those prioritizations. You need to create an initiative registry to track that progress and alignment. You can do this again with a software solution. You can do this with an in-house tool. You maybe already have a tool in-house, but make sure you've got a registry to be able to do that and know how to track that progress. You also need to evaluate initiatives based on ROI, feasibility, and strategic fit. So sit down with your CFO and your CEO or the C-suite in general and say, which of these things are most important? How do we align it for our own organization? And you can turn the volume or the mixture up and down based on either your organizational needs or the type of industry you're in or something else. Once that's done, you can now move to the next step if you have a portfolio management framework. You've got a review board or some sort of a prioritization committee that's helping to make these prioritization decisions. And you've started the process of building alignment workshops with your business units. Because importantly now, we've got to do the work of saying, this is the enterprise strategy in general, but here's how we're going to localize it. So you're going to have to build that infrastructure to be able to have those conversations to know what we're tailoring locally relative to the enterprise priority. Gary added that the registry is important because it needs to contain value propositions that are vetted with finance. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so critical that particularly at these stages that we are in constant contact with the finance team and certainly the CFO. So step 8, we're getting up the hill. We now want to go out and start building local activation networks. So if you're not already doing this today and you're already built some of this infrastructure, this step might be new for you, but I think it's really, really critical. When I've looked across the organizations I've worked with over the last 20 years that have been successful, almost always they have this. So the goal here is to empower business units and geographies to adapt and activate. It's really important that the transformation office doesn't hold all the cards, but we're distributing them out and we're actually building change champions and we're building support and we're building a grassroots network of people that can actually aid this process. The actions here, you want to appoint local transformation leads or liaisons. So either select your change champions or see who emerges as the right folks to be the natural liaisons or leads in each of the local geographies or business units. You want to provide them with the toolkits, the templates, and the coaching so that they can take that common lingua franca, but localize it to their needs. So the way that this shows up, for example, in an office environment might be very different than the way it shows up in one of your plants. That's okay. That's what we want. And we actually need to have those local liaisons to help us understand what works here and what isn't going to work here, and do we need something new? And then we want to establish peer forums and communities of practice. So it's important that we support these folks with communities so that they can actually learn from their peers, share with their peers, start to identify best practices and identify how to transmit those best practices to other sort of like contexts. We know we've passed this hurdle if we can identify our local change agent network in a map. So we know that these are the people that we're relying on across our organization and we can name them. We know that also we've got an engagement plan for local teams. So we know how we're communicating with them and we can document that. And then really important, we need to make sure that we've got active feedback loops, two-way feedback loops, right? Because not only do we want to be able to transmit information out to the periphery, but we want to hear back what's working, what's not working, and how we can make it better. We need to constantly grow and change our transformation capability to also adapt to the needs of our customers in our organization. So this has to be a two-way conversation. So we're going to move to step 9. We're going to launch. This is the part where we're starting to send it out into the organization and build our brand. And like any brand launch, we need to make sure that we are constantly communicating and engaging our stakeholders to build momentum. So we've got our transformation initiative for ourselves first. We need to go out there and actually build that momentum, demonstrate some early wins, and start to build our brand as a transformation office as a strategic enabler. So to do that, we want to do a couple things. We want to craft a compelling narrative around the role and the value for the transformation office. Paint a vision. What's the vision of the transformation office? How do you tell that story? How do you equip everybody with that same script so that everyone on the team is starting to be advocates and evangelize, if you will, why we're here and what we're going to do? We want to tailor messages by stakeholder group and region. So we want to be able to take that message, but translate it into how we're going to help particular roles. So what does this mean for the project management team? How might this support the sales team? For the Australia team, what's it going to mean for you? You can use AI here is just another example of using a technology to say, let's take this 100-page deck that we've developed on the transformation office and turn it into 2 or 3 minutes of key messages for each of these key tailored audiences. We don't need to give everybody everything at once, but we need to get them at least interested in learning more. So how do we start that journey? And then constantly, we want to be celebrating our successes and highlighting our transformation stories. So we also do need to build up our own PR capability to be able to tell the stories of where this has shown up as success. Here's a best practice that we learned. Get people sort of getting the rhythm of, oh, wow, they're making an impact. And we're telling those stories so that people not only want to rely on the transformation office and come to us as customers, but also that they want to be part of the change themselves. We've crossed this step when we know that communications plan and content calendar has been published. So we've got a communications plan, we've got a content calendar, and it's been published and assigned to be continuously updated. We know that we've got a stakeholder engagement strategy. We know how we're going to communicate with these different audiences. We know what scaffolding we're going to be writing those messages along on. And we have the ability to be able to communicate broadly. This is actually not a subtlety, right? Sometimes we're oftentimes gated at communications. I can't get stuff out through the communications office without their approval. We need to remove that obstacle and make sure we've got direct communications capabilities. And then we want to have a way that we can actually measure. So we want to measure the awareness. We want to measure the sentiment. We want to be able to measure, are people getting our message? Are people understanding why we're doing this, what we're here for, how we might equip them? So we want to be measuring our own sentiment and awareness as we're moving through this process. All right, so that was a lot of 9 steps, but you can see on the map now, we've got a really big step coming up. So somehow we're up the hill. We've got to go all the way around the mountain and up a little bit higher. And I built this deliberately because this is a step that I really want to highlight and focus. Anyone guess? Actually, let's do this in the chat first. I'm curious. Anyone know what the next step might be? No guesses? Hypercare. Reflection, adapt, pilot, implement, sustain, build adoption, lessons learned. All right. Well, so you're building my case for why we have 11 steps instead of 10. A lot of those things are going to be in step 11. Step 10 is culture. So we need to actually ensure that part of our office's mission is also to help build and cultivate a culture of change. This can't be outsourced. We've actually got to own this. And the reason for this is this. We know ultimately that your effectiveness as a transformation office is ultimately going to hinge on the broader organizational culture. Recall from last week, if you saw that I defined change capacity as having 2 components. First one is change capability. And this is basically the capability that the transformation office owns and will build. And change agility. This is the speed and flexibility with which an organization can respond to change. That change agility part is culture. So this step, yes, Yolanda, this step is almost always overlooked or minimized. But I would argue that if we don't actually focus on this and own this as one of our top priorities in the transformation office, we're going to be hampered. We're going to be slowed down. We're not going to be as effective as we can be. Because at the end of the day, we got to have everybody to the last mile, to the frontline folks, being part of this change movement. So this step is critical. It could be its own webinar, but I wanted to insert this as the big step 10. We need to embed that agility into the organization's DNA. There's a couple actions we can take here, and this is also a step that never ends, by the way. So though I've given you some closing requirements, it's going to be constant because the organization's constantly growing and changing. The actions that I'd encourage you to think about taking. Number 1, define the mindsets and behaviors that you want to have in the organization. So for your organization, define the mindsets and behaviors that you'd like to see people exhibiting at a base case. It's going to be different for every organization and different for every environment, but I think it's actually critical that you can articulate, this is what good looks like, and this is what we know we're going to be successful with if we have everyone doing these 3, 4, 5 behaviors and holding this 1, 2, or 3 mindsets. Number 2, partner with your HR and your L&D team to integrate change agility into your leadership development. It's critical that whether you're developing leaders or onboarding new leaders, that leaders be the frontline role models for this. So we want to make sure that we've got a very formalized process for building those mindsets and behaviors into our leaders first, because they need to role model it to the rest of the organization and hold them accountable for it. I encourage you to use storytelling, recognition programs, or learning moments to reinforce these change successes. So just like a couple steps before, we were talking about building your brand. It's the same thing here. Not only can you celebrate these successes and best practices, but you can celebrate these mindsets and behaviors in action, and that will help to create the movement that you want. If people see others doing it, they're more likely to follow along and join. And then lastly, leverage AI and engagement analytics to monitor the sentiment and culture evolution in real time. So start to look for those signals in the organization, just like you are for any of your other transformation initiatives, to understand what is sentiment, what are people feeling, what are people thinking, what are people saying. Understand what you're up against, understand what's working, what's not working, so that you can constantly iterate. The requirements of this are these. You want to make sure that you've got a change leadership development curriculum. So we need to make sure that we've started with leaders first. We want to make sure we've got a culture baseline assessment. So where are we at today? So figure out what those mindsets and behaviors are, and then measure today. How much of this are we actually doing today? So we've got a baseline so that ultimately we can measure where our maturity model is taking us. Are we advancing? Are we declining? Are we staying static? And then we want to make sure we've built in continuous reinforcement mechanisms. So what are the ways that we're using communications, maybe gamification, maybe contests, maybe internal success videos? What are all the things that we can do as a toolkit to echo and amplify our efforts? So this one's a big one. I probably will do a webinar on this at some point because I think it's a big topic, but I think it's really critical that we embed this in our checklist and our roadmap as we go forward. So coming around the curve, I think people guessed at the next one already. Step 11 is continuous improvement. So our job is never done. We need to constantly take a look at, evaluate, and evolve our transformation office and its capabilities. We're going to use real-time data and lessons learned to refine our methods. So by constantly doing those postmortems, by constantly evaluating what's working, what's not, by doing those start, stop, continue exercises, we can figure out what's working, what's not, and how we get better. We want to measure and report on our impact regularly. So again, part of our branding exercise is to know the metrics and know which metrics we're moving and communicate them. We should be bragging about our successes. We should also be owning our failures and doing it very publicly and transparently. That will actually help us build the brand as a strategic enabler in the organization. And then we want to scale our capabilities as much as we can by using technology, partnerships, and skill building. So we're typically always going to be under-resourced relative to the amount of work we need to do to activate change in an organization. Where can you actually build some supports? Where can you use technology? Where can you use AI? Where can you use partners? Maybe you don't want to build your own training program, so you might go to someone like ProSci, for example, to partner for your training and development program for your folks. There's got to be places that you can build leverage. Look for those and continuously start applying them. And stay on the hunt for new ones, because obviously the pace of change means there's also pace of new opportunities. The requirements here, I would ask that you would have these things. I'd like to see you have a continuous improvement framework. So how do you make this not sort of a one-off event, but a continuous process? Are you doing quarterly reviews? Are you doing start, stop, continue efforts on a weekly basis? Are you doing postmortems after every activity? What is your rhythm in your organization where you're going to formally say, these are the times we're going to evaluate and make changes about where we're going next? You should have at least an annual transformation office performance review. So do a performance review of what we've accomplished in the last year and where we're going in the next year, and make sure that that is very publicly shared across the organization so that you can continue to demonstrate your impact, but also use it as an evaluation moment. Just like we evaluate employees, hopefully more than annually, we need to do this at least annually for our organization. And then lastly, develop your own maturity model for your transformation capability. You want to measure in your organization, where are we in our maturity level towards this goal? How many of our people are actually exhibiting the mindsets and behaviors in our culture? Which parts of our structure are supporting it and not supporting it? There's lots of different maturity models out there. I'd be happy to, and will share some of them as examples in the future, but you need to pick one that works best for your type of organization, but then be able to measure against it. So you can always sort of have a look and say, I know where we're at in our journey and I know where we've got to go yet. So with that, I want to leave you with one big word wall of information, but this is going to be useful, and I will actually publish this out so people have it. To do those things, we need to be able to know how to measure our success. So I offer up here a number of examples of both key change indicators that will measure the leading indicators, the steps towards those KPIs, and then also some key performance indicators that you can use to actually measure the impact of the transformation office itself. Of course, for each of our initiatives, we're going to have KPIs that we're solving for. Maybe we're solving for a higher net promoter score, or we're solving for revenue growth. Those KPIs are not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about are the KPIs for your transformation office that you're building. How do we actually measure and communicate our value? So a couple of examples on the key change indicator side, things like awareness and understanding. How many people are aware of and understanding what we're doing and why? What is the employee sentiment? How are we measuring that? What is the leadership behavior? Are we actually seeing leaders do those things that we've trained them to do? And are they actually being accountable for those mindsets and behaviors? We should probably be measuring things like change fatigue. Are we actually seeing that this particular organization is just overwhelmed and maybe we need to take the foot off the gas a little bit on that one and maybe reinvest resources over here? We want to be measuring, as I mentioned last, our cultural maturity. So where are we in the model, and can we articulate that? We want to be talking about our participation in change activities. What's the level of participation we're seeing? So as we're rolling out communications, as we're learning and training, as we're rolling out events, town hall meetings, new software modules, what is the level of take up? Is our email open rate 2%? Is our podcast consumption rate 80%? We want to know those things so that we can actually start to optimize for what's working best. And we want to always be ready with some sort of a change readiness index. We want to be able to know, where are we at today, and can we absorb this change that's coming tomorrow? And if not, what do we need to do? On the KPI side, the things that I'd like you to think about are things like your activation velocity. Are we actually seeing each of our initiatives moving successfully up that activation curve, and how fast? We want to be thinking about things like strategic alignment. So are we working on the stuff that's aligned with what the CEO just talked about at the town hall as our most important priorities? We want to be able to measure our initiative success rates. So we know that 80% of transformation fails in the current state. Are we doing better than that or not? And at the level of each initiative, what's our success rate? That'll help us learn how to do it better next time. We want to be able to communicate to the CFO our time to value. So that's going to be really critical to be able to predict when we're going to be realizing that ROI. We also want to know what our stakeholder engagement effectiveness is. Are we getting the message to the people in the right time in the right place? And then lastly, we want to be looking at both adoption metrics and technology utilization metrics. So these things collectively are going to help us to continue to build the business case for why we're relevant, why we're important, and why we're a strategic enabler. Lots of questions in the chat about this content. So what I will share is that we're going to be publishing in about a week and a half a white paper, and I'm going to be unpacking some of this stuff in detail. So we'll take some questions at the end today, but just know for everybody that's attending today, we are going to be shipping out a little bit of an unpacking of these, as well as some other examples of how you might be able to use these in your organization. So to close this off and then get to some questions, we want to be able to move from that pain to that gain. We want to avoid being the industry laggard who continually is falling behind because we don't have this common capability. We want to be moving towards that durable competitive advantage that's going to come with the transformation office that we're building. My key takeaway today is this: there is a methodical approach to both building and refining your transformation capability. And importantly, combined with that culture activation, that big step 10, your organization's change capacity can improve. So change capacity is ultimately, I believe, the future durable competitive advantage. In the future, our organizations are going to be measured by how quickly they can evolve and adapt and innovate relative to their peers. So change capacity is really what we need to be solving for. And that's going to come about both from that change agility in our culture, as well as the change capability of our transformation office. Couple closing thoughts. The most resilient organizations will not only choose the right model, but we will continually evolve it. So for every one of you today, hopefully there's something in here that you can utilize to help understand where we're at, what are the gaps, what are the opportunities, and how do we get there. There's no right way to do this. It's got to be contextualized to your organization. But I believe that this roadmap of 11 steps could be a good checklist for you to think about your health and your wellness as an organization and what the gaps and the opportunities are for you so that you can then build the business case to close those gaps and harness those opportunities. So my call to action is this: assess your current transformation capability against these 11 steps, and then identify those gaps and opportunities. Then number two, start a conversation internally, ideally with your C-suite, about how to evolve and future-proof your transformation office, and then build that business case for change. You're going to need to not only build the office, but you're going to need to constantly evolve and grow it, and you'll be constantly seeking the resources to be able to do the next challenge of the future. Lastly, I hope you join us again next week. I've got one more session of content, and then we're going to have a panel. But next week, we're going to be talking about how do we sustain the transformation capability over time. So building on what we've talked about for the last 3 weeks, we'll talk about some sustainment models and some approaches that you can actually do this constant evolution. Following that, we're going to be doing an executive panel where we're going to bring on some folks that have been down this journey before. So I also hope you join us for that in 2 weeks. Lastly, if you would, Julie, drop a link in the chat for folks if you haven't already that maybe aren't already signed up for next week. We'd love to have you join our webinar. If you're interested in a Tigerhall demo to see how we do this in practice, I'm sure we would be happy to arrange that for you as well. And then, as always, I am available to folks. I'd love to actually talk with you about what you're doing. If you've got questions, if you want to dig in any of these things in more detail, please reach out to me directly via either LinkedIn or my email, eric@tigerhall.com. And I'd love to set up 30 minutes to chat with you about your experience. I'm constantly learning from you, and a lot of what I'm learning is going into this content. So thank you in advance. Julie, we've got time for just a couple of questions, I think.
Yeah, so here, give me a second. Furiously typing over here. All right. So we have a question from Riza. What could you provide a deeper dive on what that change capability matrix could look like?
Yeah, so it's different in lots of organizations. The one that I actually published in my book that I use personally when I'm looking at organizations is the 8 dimensions of the org. So what I want to do, I'm not going to go through all of it right now, but I can actually send this out with our follow-up today. You can look at an organization through a number of lenses. They typically include things like skills and capabilities, supporting technologies, maybe organizational values, maybe the workforce organization. All aspects of your organization need to be working in harmony. So you can't sort of build the skills and the capabilities and the mandate that people become change makers, but not equip them with, for example, supporting technologies to actually help them do their job more effectively. So I think of a change matrix as being an evaluation of our health in each of those dimensions that you can then go and measure every year and say, all right, has anything changed? Have we made progress here? And is it in harmony? So I will make sure to send out the 8 dimensions of the org worksheet with the follow-up today so that maybe that'll build those ideas. And what I encourage people to do is build one for your own organization. Understand, based on the type of industry you're in, where are the places that you need to build that change capability and how do you measure where you're at? Thank you.
So the next question is, why is addressing culture towards the end of the steps that you presented? Um, Tamara was wondering like why you wouldn't want to maybe address it towards the beginning. Why is it further out?
Um, it's out principally because I think in my case, if you're starting from scratch, which is how we designed those 11 steps, you need to actually have the transformation office in place to be the sort of the first line, first responders, if you will. Um, that said, I think the culture stuff can happen at any stage, right? So if you already have a transformation office in place, then you can actually just accelerate your efforts there. So it was really more, it's less that it's the 10th thing than if you're starting from scratch, it's the thing that made the most sense because you want to basically have chosen your change methodology. You want to have built your change framework. You want to have equipped your team. You want to have actually identified those local resources and have the structure in place, the scaffolding in place, if you will, so that you can actually go out with a consistent message about what those mindsets and behaviors need to be that support that. So it's a convenience, but I would encourage you to go ahead and start working on the change at any time, because if you know those core things, you can start to beat the drum and build that momentum.
So, Emmeline had a question about the cultural aspects of change and where it's defined. I believe you were on a specific stage. Emmeline, do you want to give us a bit of a voiceover as to what your question is?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can.
we can hear you.
Awesome, thank you so much. So this goes back, I think, to the previous question with regards to, the assessment towards the end. Culture, especially when it's deeply embedded in an organization, is very difficult to shift and to move. And so, just following through those steps, you indicate that, and you just explained, and thank you for that, that you can bring in culture at any point of standing up your transformation. But because it's such a deeply embedded and rooted component of an organization, there are some underlying mindsets and behaviors that are quite difficult to shift and to, I guess, enhance. And so my question is would we not consider doing some of that legwork up front versus waiting until the latter stages of that roadmap? And then to that, what I guess tools or relationships do you suggest when standing up your TMO to get ahead of the curve and to begin to propose, analyzing, or looking at an organization's culture?
Awesome. That might be a whole webinar on its own, but thank you for the question.
Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
no, it's a great one. So we'll close with that because I always want to give people 5 minutes to get to their next meeting with some crossing time across campus. So I think that the key thing about the culture is this. Culture is the hardest, in my experience, culture is the hardest change to shift, right? So of all the enterprise changes that we do in organizations, typically culture change is the one that's the sort of most unruly and challenging to do it. Number one piece of advice there is you've got to start with the leadership. So this is, if you're going to start it out of order, if you're going to start it today, you're not going to shift the culture unless you get the C-suite living, walking, and talking those mindsets and behaviors that you want the organization to mimic. If they're not, you're not going to get anywhere. So it's one of the reasons I think that we recommended that you build that leadership training in early on in the process because you need to get the role models showing that we value this. This is important to the organization, and this is what I expect, and I'm going to hold you accountable to do. So I would start with having a leadership conversation. Sit down with your senior leaders, agree on what those mindsets and behaviors need to be. Make sure you've got a good executive sponsor that is going to actually back you up because this can't just come from the transformation office. It's got to come from all the leaders. And that's important, most important advice I can offer on that particular topic right now. When I've seen leaders do this consistently, their cultures reflect it. When we see leaders not do it consistently, the culture will ignore it. So those are my closing thoughts, I think, for today. But thank you so much for the question, and I would love to engage. I think we will actually, Julie. Let's build a webinar on this culture question because I think there's a lot of content here. So with that, I want to thank everyone. Julie, thank you for your help as always. And again, reach out to me if you've got questions or you want to have a conversation around this stuff. I love learning from one another and understanding what's working in one place, what's maybe not working in another place, and some of your best practices. So always happy to have conversations with you all. And I hope we see you next week. Thanks all.